What happens when a teacher shuts down an 11-year-old boy for lying about his dad, only to watch a 4-star general walk straight into her classroom hours later? Braxton Morrow never wanted the spotlight, but that morning it landed on him like a weight he couldn't step out of, and it hit him right in the middle of room 12 with 24 pairs of eyes watching. "Braxton, that's enough," Mrs. Jolene Faraday snapped, cutting straight through his quiet voice. "We've talked about making up stories for attention." The room stiffened, not a gasp, not a whisper, just a sudden tension that made every kid freeze mid-movement. Braxton blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. He hadn't even finished his sentence. All he'd said was, "My dad came home this morning. He said he might." That's when she shut him down. Mrs. Faraday set her red pen on the edge of her desk, as if the matter was settled. "Please open your reading packet," she said, brushing him aside like he was a distraction. Braxton felt heat crawl up his neck. He wasn't someone who talked much, especially not about his dad. His classmates barely knew anything about him, except that he loved drawing planes in the margins of his homework and that he never caused trouble. But that morning, he'd woken up full of excitement. His father had surprised him by showing up at the door at sunrise in full uniform, boots still dusty from travel. There wasn't a lot that lit Braxton up like that, and now this. He swallowed the lump forming in his throat and slowly closed the notebook in front of him. There was nothing to argue. Arguing would only make it worse. He kept his eyes down, fingers tightening around the edges of the pages. Nearby, Ava Gentry glanced at him with a confused expression, but she didn't say anything. No one did. A boy in the back made a face that said, "She caught him," and a couple of kids traded looks, unsure of what to believe. Mrs. Faraday picked up her pen again. "Page 9, everyone. Let's not waste time." The clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Each second felt sharp. Braxton tried to listen as she went over vocabulary, but his mind kept drifting back to that morning, the surprise knock on his bedroom door, the deep voice saying, "Morning, buddy," after months of crackling video calls. His father had promised to stop by the school later, just to see how he was doing. He hadn't announced the time, only said he wanted it to be a small moment between them. But it didn't feel small anymore. Halfway through the lesson, Mrs. Faraday asked a question about the reading passage. Braxton usually raised his hand, not to show off, but because he genuinely liked school. Today, though, he stared at the corner of his desk. The confidence he usually had, quiet, steady, felt like it had slipped out of the room when she called him a liar. "Braxton," she said, pretending she didn't notice he'd shut down. "You usually participate. Anything you'd like to share?" Her tone carried more sting than concern. He shook his head gently. "No, ma'am." "That's unusual for you," she replied, raising an eyebrow in a way that made his stomach twist. "Let me remind everyone, honesty matters in this classroom." A couple of students glanced at him again. This time the looks were different, curious, wondering, doubtful. Braxton pressed his lips together. He wished the floor would open up and swallow him whole. By the time they reached the mid-morning break, the whispers had begun. They weren't loud, but they were enough. "I think he made the whole thing up. He doesn't even talk about his dad." Why would he lie, though? Kids don't always try to be hurtful, but rumors don't need bad intentions to sting. Braxton walked to his cubby, pretending not to hear anything, pretending not to care. But he could feel the eyes. He could feel the shift. He could feel how quickly a room could turn on you when an adult put a label on your name. He moved slowly, trying to make himself smaller, trying to stay unnoticed. He wasn't angry. He just felt something hollow settle in his chest, something that made it hard to meet anyone's gaze. He sat back at his desk as the class returned, his heart beating faster every time he thought about his father coming later. How would Mrs. Faraday react when she saw him? Would she think Braxton had convinced someone to pretend? Would she even believe the truth when it stood in front of her? For now, all he could do was wait. But the day was far from finished, and the next moment, waiting for him would change everything in that classroom. By the time the first lunch bell rang, the story had already twisted itself into something Braxton didn't recognize. Kids didn't wait for permission to talk about what happened. They carried the moment like it was exciting news, passing it from table to table as if they had personally witnessed a scandal. Braxton walked into the cafeteria slowly, tray in hand, eyes fixed on the floor. He hoped he could blend in. He hoped the noise of the room would swallow everything, but the whispers stuck to him like little hooks. He said his dad was coming back from some mission, Mrs. Faraday told him to stop lying. Why does he say stuff like that? He sat at the end of a long white table, placing himself a few seats away from two boys who were already mid-conversation. One of them, Trevor Ansley, looked over as Braxton sat down. Trevor wasn't mean, but he had a talent for repeating stories the way kids repeat jokes, loudly and without thinking. "Hey," Trevor said to the boy next to him, not bothering to lower his voice. "That's him. That's the one who said his dad was coming to school." The boy beside Trevor, a kid named Seth Loring, leaned forward to get a better look. "But Mrs. Faraday said he made it up, right?" "Well, yeah," Trevor replied. "Why would she say that if it wasn't true?" Seth shrugged like the logic was obvious. Braxton kept his head down, moving his food around his tray without really eating. He wished he could disappear. It wasn't the first time a rumor had made the rounds at Crestwood Ridge Elementary. Rumors were practically a sport here, but this time the rumor was about his father, the person he admired the most. Ava Gentry approached the table slowly. She wasn't Braxton's best friend, but she was one of the few people who didn't jump on rumors without thinking. She sat across from him and leaned forward. "Hey," she said gently. "Are you okay?" He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine." "Braxton, people are talking a lot. Maybe you should just say something." "About what?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. "About your dad. Maybe explain it. They don't know anything." He tightened his grip on his fork. "I told the truth." "I know," she whispered, "but they don't get it." He didn't respond. He didn't trust his voice not to shake. At another table, two girls leaned close together. "My mom said people lie when they want attention. Maybe that's what he's doing." "Sounds like it." The weight of everyone assuming the worst felt heavier than the morning itself. He knew his dad, General Rowan Morrow, wasn't someone who talked about his position casually. Even at home, he spoke about his work in pieces, always careful, always controlled. Braxton had learned early not to brag about him, so he didn't mention it to anyone. Not teachers, not classmates, not even the kids he sat with at lunch every day. But today had been special. Today, his father had come home early, earlier than planned, just to surprise him. And Braxton had been proud, really proud. For the first time, he had wanted to share something real. Now he regretted opening his mouth. Ava ate in silence after that, staying close just so he didn't feel alone. Everyone else continued feeding the story like it was entertainment. Meanwhile, Braxton tried to breathe normally, pretending every new whisper wasn't aimed directly at him. After lunch, the playground wasn't any better. Small groups formed near the swings and the hopscotch squares. A couple of kids from another class came by to ask questions, which was nothing more than thinly disguised curiosity. "So, is he really coming to school?" a girl asked. Braxton kept his tone calm. "Yes." "Like, today?" "Yes." "Why?" Before he could answer, Mrs. Quimby blew her whistle in the distance, signaling the end of recess. Braxton exhaled, relieved the questioning was over for now. As the kids lined up, Seth murmured loudly, "He's still pretending." Braxton's shoulders tightened. This whole thing had grown faster than he expected. With every new voice, the room of doubters felt bigger. When they returned to class, Mrs. Faraday acted like the morning never happened. She dove straight into math instruction, her tone brisk and rehearsed. But the adults weren't the problem anymore. The chain reaction she set off was. Braxton tried to focus on long division, but the numbers blurred. All he could think about was the moment his father would walk through those doors. Would people go quiet? Would they apologize? Would anyone believe him then? Mrs. Faraday called out a problem. "Braxton, go ahead and give me the answer." His heart dropped. He looked up slowly. "I didn't get that far." She sighed loudly, the kind of sigh meant for an audience. "You're usually much more prepared. I really hope today isn't another example of you." She stopped. Not fully. Just long enough to glance at the class before deciding to move on. But Braxton caught it, and it stung deeper than anything the kids had said. But as the minutes ticked by, something was already shifting in the front office. Something heading straight toward room 12. The day had gone sideways so quickly that Braxton barely recognized the feeling sitting in his chest. But if anyone had seen his morning, the real start of his day, they would have understood exactly why he'd spoken up in class, even though he almost never talked about himself. 6 hours earlier, before the sun had even stretched over the houses in their Sacramento neighborhood, someone knocked softly on his bedroom door. "Hey, you awake?" a deep voice asked. Braxton shot up in bed. He knew that voice instantly. It was one he'd replayed in his head every night since his dad left for his most recent deployment. He scrambled to the door and pulled it open. His father stood there, General Rowan Morrow, still in full uniform, the same one Braxton had only seen through grainy video calls for months. His boots were dusty, his hair slightly disheveled, his eyes tired but bright. "Dad?" Braxton whispered, barely believing what he was seeing. Rowan opened his arms and pulled him close, hugging him tight. "Yeah, buddy. I'm home." Braxton didn't say anything at first. He just held on, eyes squeezed shut, afraid the moment would disappear if he blinked too long. His dad's heartbeat was steady, strong, familiar. It was the safest place he knew. Rowan pulled back slightly. "You're taller," he said. "I leave for a handful of months, and suddenly you've grown 3 inches. Braxton laughed quietly. "It's only 1 inch. I'm sticking with 3. They went to the kitchen, where the early light through the blinds cast long lines across the counter. Rowan poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the island, watching his son grab cereal. "Your mom at work already?" Rowan asked. "Yeah," Braxton said, pouring milk. "She said to tell you she'll be home early today." Rowan nodded softly. "I'll see her then." They ate in a comfortable silence. It wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that fills in all the gaps after months apart, the kind where every small moment feels bigger than usual. When Braxton finished, he wiped his mouth and hesitated before speaking. "Hey, Dad?" "Yeah? Are you really coming to school today?" "That's the plan," Rowan said, adjusting the cuff on his uniform. "I want to check in, meet your teacher, see how you're doing. It's been too long." Braxton's eyes lit up. "Can you come before lunch?" Rowan raised an eyebrow playfully. "Trying to show me off, huh?" "No," Braxton replied quickly, then softened. "Maybe a little," Rowan chuckled. "I'll stop by sometime this afternoon. I want it to be a surprise." "Okay," Braxton said, but inside he was buzzing. His dad didn't get to visit school much. His schedule was unpredictable, always shifting, always pulling him far from home. Braxton understood it, even if he didn't always like it. But today felt different. Today was theirs. Before they left for school, Rowan placed a hand on Braxton's shoulder. "Hey," he said softly, "I'm proud of you. I know it's hard when I'm away so much, but you've handled it better than most adults I know." Braxton felt his face warm, but this time not from embarrassment. "Thanks, Dad." Rowan tapped him gently on the chest. "And remember, you don't have to hide who I am or what I do. You don't have to brag either. Just be you. That's enough." Braxton nodded. The house felt lighter with his dad home. Breakfast tasted better. Even the bus ride felt easier. He kept glancing out the window, imagining how the day would go when his father stepped through the school doors. But things didn't turn out that simply. By the time he reached room 12, the feeling of confidence he'd begun the morning with was strong enough to make him raise his hand during the class discussion. He spoke carefully, choosing his words, not trying to show off, just sharing something honest. "My dad came home this morning," he'd said, trying not to smile too much. "He said he might..." And then it happened. Mrs. Faraday shut him down before he could finish, before he could explain anything. The same excitement that had filled him just hours earlier drained right out. He replayed that moment as he sat at his desk later, tracing the corners of his notebook with his fingertip. He thought about how his dad would react if he knew. Rowan had always taught him to speak the truth with confidence, even when it wasn't easy. But confidence didn't matter if no one listened. He wondered if maybe he should have stayed quiet. Maybe he shouldn't have tried to talk in the first place. His father had told him not to hide things, but maybe some things were better kept to himself. The clock on the wall clicked toward the afternoon, each minute feeling heavier. And still, he watched the door, waiting for the moment his father arrived. Waiting for something to finally break the weight sitting on his shoulders. But while Braxton waited in silence, Mrs. Faraday was about to get a call that would shift the entire day in a direction no one in room 12 expected. Mrs. Jolene Faraday was not the kind of teacher who liked surprises. She liked structure. She liked control. And most of all, she liked to believe she had a solid read on every kid in her classroom. So when the phone on her desk rang in the middle of her social studies lesson, she paused with clear irritation. She picked it up. "This is Mrs. Faraday." A brief silence. Yes, I see. Well, what kind of visitor? Her tone softened slightly, but her eyebrows pulled together. A parent? Now? The class watched her carefully, though most pretended not to. Braylon Cortez dropped his pencil on purpose just to lean over and eavesdrop. Mrs. Faraday pressed her lips into a tight line. Yes, all right. I'll be there in a moment. When she hung up, she didn't look at the class right away. She straightened a stack of papers that didn't need straightening. She smoothed her blouse as if preparing for something formal. Then she walked to the door, heels tapping sharply against the tiles. I'll be right back, she said. Everyone continue working quietly. Her eyes shifted, almost unconsciously, toward Braxton. He kept his gaze toward his worksheet, pretending he didn't notice her hesitation. The air between them felt thick, like something neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Once she stepped into the hallway, the door clicked shut behind her, and the classroom erupted with low whispers. Maybe it's someone's mom. No, she looked nervous. What if someone's in trouble? Braxton stayed silent. He didn't let himself imagine anything. He didn't want to hope. Not after how the day had gone. Out in the hallway, Mrs. Faraday walked with quick, stiff steps. She rehearsed possible scenarios in her mind. Maybe a parent was upset about a grade. Maybe the principal needed help with the substitute in third grade. Maybe the district office sent someone unexpected, but she wasn't ready for what she actually saw when she turned the corner. Principal Howard Rourke stood near the office doors, hands clasped tightly in front of him. And next to him, a tall man in full Air Force uniform, posture straight, presence steady, ribbons lined across his chest with absolute precision. The fluorescent lights overhead reflected off the metal pins on his jacket. He didn't look impatient or angry, just quietly powerful, the kind of person who didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. Mrs. Faraday, Principal Rourke said, clearing his throat, this is General Rowan Morrow. He's here to pick up his son. The world seemed to tilt for just a second. Her voice caught. His son? General Morrow stepped forward, extending a hand. Good afternoon. I understand you're Braxton's teacher. Her hand shook just slightly as she took his. Yes, I am. His grip was firm, confident. He mentioned there was some confusion earlier. Thought it might help if I came by in person. There was no accusation in his tone, no anger, just calm clarity, and somehow that made it worse. Mrs. Faraday's cheeks lost color. She glanced at Principal Rourke as if hoping he'd jump in and explain things for her, but he stayed silent, folding his hands behind his back. She swallowed. Yes, he mentioned something during morning discussion. Rowan waited, giving her space to continue. She didn't. I see, he said. I'm sorry if my arrival is disruptive. I didn't mean to cause any surprise. I simply promised him I'd stop by. His gentleness made her stomach twist. She had assumed the worst. No, she had assumed something beneath even that. She had dismissed him, dismissed his son, dismissed his honesty. She finally found her voice. General Morrow, I wasn't aware that he was telling the truth, he asked, not sharply but quietly enough that she felt the weight behind the words. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Her throat closed around the apology forming inside her. He didn't push. Instead, he looked past her, toward the classroom at the end of the hall. May I see him? Principal Rourke nodded. Of course. I'll walk with you. As the three of them stepped down the hallway, a few students from another class peeked around the corner, whispering excitedly. They had no idea what was happening, only that someone important was walking through their school in a uniform they'd only seen in movies. Inside room 12, the class was still buzzing quietly. But the moment the door handle moved, every head turned. The door swung open. General Rowan Morrow stepped inside. Every voice fell silent. Every whisper died instantly. Even the kids who didn't know anything about military ranks could tell this was someone different. Braxton looked up slowly from his desk. His eyes widened, not with fear, but with the unmistakable shock of a dream he thought he'd spoiled. Dad? He breathed. Rowan gave a small, warm smile. Hey, buddy, ready to go? At the front of the room, Mrs. Faraday stood frozen, hands clasped tightly, watching a truth she denied walk right past her. But the moment wasn't done, because what happened next would spread through the hallway faster than any rumor ever had. General Rowan Morrow didn't raise his voice, He didn't need to. The simple act of standing inside room 12 changed the entire atmosphere instantly. Kids who had whispered about Braxton at lunch now sat with their hands folded, eyes wide, pretending to focus on anything other than the man in uniform standing in front of them. Braxton rose from his seat slowly, almost unsure if he was allowed to move. He took hesitant steps toward his father, the same father he'd proudly mentioned hours earlier, right before being shut down. Rowan met him halfway, placing a hand on his shoulder. It wasn't a show of authority. It was gentle, familiar, real. "You okay?" Rowan asked quietly. Braxton nodded once. "Yeah." Rowan studied his face. "You sure?" This time, Braxton's voice steadied. "I am now." Mrs. Faraday shifted uncomfortably at the front of the room. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced them still. Principal Rourke stood beside her, saying nothing, watching the moment unfold with careful eyes. Several students leaned forward to get a better look. A couple of them, kids who had fed the rumors the loudest, looked like they'd seen a ghost. Rowan turned to Mrs. Faraday. "I'm sorry for the interruption," he said, still calm. "I know this isn't the usual type of visit." She opened her mouth, ready to speak, but no words came out. Not yet. He continued. "I came because I wanted to keep my promise to him. It's not often I get to show up during the school day." Braxton glanced around the room. For the first time all day, he didn't feel small. Mrs. Faraday straightened her blouse and finally managed to speak. "General Morrow, I certainly didn't expect—" Rowan didn't interrupt, but his presence alone made her search for her next words carefully. "I didn't know," she said, voice low. "I thought he was stretching the truth. Students sometimes—" She stopped, realizing she was explaining something that couldn't be excused. Rowan remained composed. "I understand children exaggerate sometimes, but Braxton hasn't been that type of kid." He glanced down at his son. "He's honest, almost to a fault." The room grew impossibly still. A couple kids exchanged guilty looks. Mrs. Faraday pressed her lips together tightly. "Yes, I see that now." Rowan didn't need to say more. The quiet acknowledgement hung in the air, carrying more weight than any lecture could. "May I take him early?" Rowan asked the principal. "Of course," Principal Rourke replied quickly, grateful to have something straightforward to say. "Absolutely." As Rowan led Braxton toward the door, the entire class watched them leave, not with judgment anymore, but with something closer to awe. Some kids sat with their mouths slightly open. Others looked like they'd just witnessed history happen in a single afternoon. When Braxton stepped into the hallway with his father, he felt the difference immediately. His chest wasn't tight anymore. His steps weren't hesitant. The weight from earlier had lifted, not because others finally believed him, but because the truth stood right beside him. The hallway outside room 12 was far from empty. A group of fourth graders had gathered near the water fountain, pretending to need a drink while sneaking glances at Rowan. "Is that his dad?" one whispered. "Dude, look at the uniform. Did he come for him?" Braxton heard every word, and for once, none of it made him shrink. If anything, it made him stand a little straighter. Rowan noticed too. "You okay?" he asked again. "Yeah," Braxton said, and this time he meant it fully. As they walked toward the front office, students from nearby classrooms peeked out. Some teachers stepped into their doorways, unsure whether to intervene or simply observe. A few kids stood frozen, holding folders or backpacks, their eyes glued to the general walking down their hallway. It wasn't fear, it was respect mixed with surprise. Surprise that the quiet kid who rarely talked had a father who commanded a presence like this. Near the office entrance, Mrs. Quimby, who supervised recess earlier, stood with her jaw slightly open. She quickly tried to recover her composure. "Good afternoon, General," she said, offering a quick nod. "Afternoon," Rowan replied politely. Braxton didn't miss the way her expression softened when she looked at him. It wasn't pity, it was realization, recognition, a quiet apology without words. Inside the office, Ms. Delgado, the receptionist, nearly dropped her stapler when she looked up. "Oh, hello, welcome." Rowan smiled gently. "Just signing him out." "Of course," she said, fumbling for the clipboard. "Here, right here, take your time." While Rowan filled out the form, Braxton stood beside him, watching the pen glide across the paper. "Dad," he said softly. "Yeah? I didn't lie." Rowan paused, set the pen down, and crouched slightly to look him in the eyes. "I know you didn't," he said. "And now they know too." Braxton swallowed hard, gripping the strap of his backpack. "It hurt," he said quietly. When she said that, Rowan nodded gently, not brushing away the feeling. "I know. But sometimes people assume things before they give the truth a chance. What matters is, you stayed honest." Braxton breathed out slowly. Some knot inside him loosened. They stepped back into the hallway, ready to leave. Behind them, a few students from earlier still stared, whispering in stunned confusion. Not harmful now, just amazed. But as proud as that moment felt, the emotional storm from earlier wasn't finished yet, because Mrs. Faraday was about to confront something she hadn't faced in years, her own reflection. The hallway slowly emptied once General Rowan Morrow and Braxton stepped outside. But back in room 12, the silence clung to every desk and every corner like something heavy that refused to lift. Mrs. Jolene Faraday stood at the front of the class, staring at the door long after it closed. She felt the eyes of her students on her, curious, confused, waiting for her to say something, anything. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't have a ready explanation or a polished correction to offer. Her authority didn't feel steady, it felt cracked. "Everyone, please return to your assignments," she finally said. Her voice lacked its usual sharpness. It sounded thinner, almost uncertain. Ava Gentry raised her hand gently. "Mrs. Faraday?" Jolene swallowed. "Yes, Ava?" "I think Braxton was just excited this morning. That's all." Ava spoke carefully, trying not to sound like she was challenging her teacher. Several classmates murmured in agreement. Jolene forced a small smile. "Thank you, Ava. Let's settle down now." But even that felt flimsy. The energy in the classroom had changed, and she knew it. While the students bowed their heads over worksheets, Jolene sat at her desk, fingers tapping anxiously on top of her gradebook. Her mind spiraled back to that morning. She replayed the moment when she shut Braxton down, how quickly she dismissed his words, how confidently she assumed she understood him, how her tone cut through his sentence like it was nothing. She could picture his face perfectly, the way he had shrunk into himself, the way he had clutched his notebook, the way she ignored his silence afterward because it was easier than confronting what she'd done. She squeezed her hands together. "What was I thinking?" she whispered under her breath. Jolene wasn't blind. She knew she had formed assumptions about Braxton over the past months. He was quiet. He didn't talk about his family. He didn't share much during show and tell days. In her mind, she had built an entire false narrative about him without ever asking real questions. And now the truth had walked in wearing a uniform. Her heart thudded painfully. She wasn't proud of the picture forming in her mind. A teacher who had been too quick to judge, too comfortable in her authority, too dismissive of a child who deserved consideration, not suspicion. Principal Rourke entered quietly just as she lifted her head. He didn't look angry. He looked concerned. "Jolene," he said softly, closing the door behind him. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her voice shook. "I didn't know. I truly didn't know." "I understand," he replied, "but we need to talk about how it happened." She looked down at the edge of her desk. "I made an assumption." He pulled a chair beside her. "A strong one." "I thought he was exaggerating," she said, embarrassed. "Kids do it. They tell stories. I thought I was correcting him." Rourke lowered his tone. "But you didn't ask him. You didn't give him space, and today, that mattered." Jolene's throat tightened. "I know." The principal didn't pile on. He didn't lecture her. Instead, he sighed quietly. "You're a good teacher, Jolene." But even good teachers slip when they forget to see their students as kids with whole lives beyond these walls. Her eyes burned, but she blinked rapidly to keep them dry. "I don't want to be the kind of teacher who hurts someone." "I don't think you meant to," he said gently. "But intent doesn't erase impact." She breathed in shakily. "I need to fix this. I need to apologize to him." "You'll get that chance," Rourke said. "But don't just apologize. Reflect. Ask yourself what made you jump to that conclusion." She nodded slowly. Outside, the last bell of the day rang. Students began packing their bags, eager to leave. A few kids shot hesitant glances her way, uncertain of their teacher now, unsure how to behave around her. Trust was delicate, and hers had taken a hit. After dismissal, Jolene walked through the empty classroom, picking up stray pencils and eraser pieces just to keep her hands busy. The room felt too quiet now, too revealing. She thought about Braxton walking down the hall next to his father, a man who carried himself with quiet strength. She thought about how small Braxton must have felt being doubted, and how big the moment must have been when the truth stepped in. She felt a knot of guilt settle deeper. Later, in the parking lot, she saw Rowan and Braxton walking toward their car. She wanted to call out, say something, anything, but she froze. Her voice didn't feel ready. Her apology didn't feel complete yet. Rowan opened the passenger door for Braxton before circling around to the driver's side. He spoke to his son as they got in, his tone casual and warm, as if the earlier hallway spectacle was just a footnote in their day. Jolene watched them pull away, her hands gripping her bag straps tightly. She wasn't proud of her actions, but she also wasn't going to ignore this. She would confront it. She would own it. This wasn't just about one moment or one student. It was about the kind of person she wanted to be in her classroom. But while Jolene battled her thoughts alone, the drive home with his father became a moment Braxton would carry with him for years. The car ride home started quietly, but not the uncomfortable kind of quiet. It was the kind that gave space to breathe after a long day. Rowan kept one hand on the wheel as they drove through Sacramento's late afternoon streets, sunlight bouncing off store windows and passing cars. Braxton sat beside him, backpack on the floor, fingers tapping lightly against his jeans. "You hungry?" Rowan asked casually, eyes still on the road. Braxton shrugged. "A little. Want to grab something before we head home? There's that sandwich place you like near Florin Road." Braxton let out a small exhale that almost sounded like a laugh. Yeah, that's fine." Rowan glanced at him briefly. "You sure you're okay?" Braxton leaned his head back against the seat. "I didn't think anyone was going to believe me." "I know," Rowan said. "I could tell. She didn't even let me finish," Braxton whispered. "It felt like she decided I was lying before I even said anything." Rowan's face tightened, not with anger, but with something heavier. "That shouldn't have happened." "You weren't mad?" Braxton asked. "Oh, I was definitely mad," Rowan replied, letting out a small breath. "But walking into that classroom angry wouldn't have helped you. Sometimes the best way to make the truth clear is to let it stand on its own." Braxton thought about that. His dad wasn't the kind of man who barked orders at home. He didn't shout. He didn't stomp around. He carried himself in a way that made people listen without him having to raise his voice. Seeing him walk into room 12 earlier felt like watching a mountain move. "What did she say to you?" Braxton asked. "She didn't say much," Rowan said, "but she understood what happened. People don't always admit their mistakes out loud, but they feel them." Braxton let that sink in. He pictured Mrs. Faraday standing by the door, speechless. The shock on her face, the way her confidence drained the second she realized what she'd done. "I don't want her to be in trouble," Braxton said suddenly. Rowan looked over again. "You're thinking about her right now?" Braxton nodded slowly. "She was wrong, but I don't want her to feel awful." Rowan smiled gently. "You've got a good heart, but correcting someone doesn't mean punishing them. It just means helping them see what they didn't before." Braxton took a deep breath. The knot inside him, the one that had twisted tighter from the moment Mrs. Faraday dismissed him, had loosened, almost gone taut. Rowan pulled into the small parking lot of the sandwich shop, the same place they always went after big moments, good or bad. He turned off the engine but didn't open the door yet. "Let me tell you something important," he said, turning toward his son. "You can't control what people think about you, but you can control who you are. And today, you stayed honest, even when it hurt. That matters." Braxton looked down at his hands, absorbing every word. "And another thing," Rowan continued, "your voice has value. Don't let someone take that from you because they made a wrong assumption. You don't shrink to fit someone's mistake." Braxton met his father's eyes. "So, I shouldn't stop talking in class?" Rowan chuckled, shaking his head lightly. "No, buddy. Keep talking. Keep being you." They got out of the car and walked inside. The smell of toasted bread and warm soup filled the small restaurant. As they ordered, the atmosphere felt lighter. Not perfect, but lighter. Over sandwiches, they talked about normal things, video games, homework, the upcoming weekend, but the earlier moment lingered beneath the surface like a quiet pulse. They didn't need to discuss it much more. The important parts had already been said. Later that evening, after dinner and after Rowan had unpacked his travel bag, Braxton sat on the couch with his sketchbook. He started drawing an airplane, wide wings, sharp nose, clean lines. It was something he always drew when his mind needed balance. Rowan walked by and paused. New design? Kind of, Braxton said. It's based on the one you were telling me about last month. Rowan smiled. Looks good. But Braxton wasn't drawing just the plane. In the corner of the page, he sketched a small classroom door with a figure standing in it. Not fully detailed, just an outline. A reminder of what happened. A reminder of how things can change in a moment. The next morning, when he returned to school, Mrs. Faraday was waiting by the classroom door. She looked tense, but determined. "Braxton," she said softly, "could I speak with you for a second?" He nodded. She stepped to the side, lowering her voice. "I owe you an apology. I made a mistake yesterday. A big one. And I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. You didn't deserve that." Braxton shifted his backpack strap nervously. "It's okay." "It's not okay," she said gently. "But I'm going to be better. You have my word." He studied her face. This time she meant every word, not because his father had shown up, but because she had reflected on her actions. "Thank you," he said quietly. She smiled with a mix of gratitude and regret. "Ready for today?" "Yeah." Braxton walked into room 12 feeling lighter than he had in days. Students glanced at him, some apologetic, some embarrassed, some simply curious. But no one whispered this time. People can change. People can learn, even adults. And Braxton learned something too, that truth has a way of standing tall, even when someone tries to knock it down. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one person, to reveal it. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us what honesty, compassion, and courage look like.